The monk didn't flinch when the plasma blade missed his throat by inches. He just smiled and asked, "Is it my turn now?" The Colosseum erupted in laughter. It wasn't the kind of laughter that came from joy or respect. It was the mocking roar of thousands of galactic elites who believed they were witnessing the final joke of Earth's pathetic desperation. There, in the center of the most ruthless battle arena in the galaxy, stood a barefoot human wrapped in tattered gray robes, unarmed and unmoved, facing down a 9-foot-tall cybernetic warbeast. Tenzin, the last-minute entry from a species barely respected beyond its moon, looked less like a warrior and more like someone who had wandered in by mistake. Yet his posture was perfect, his hands loosely folded before him, and his sightless eyes half closed, as if he were merely listening to a breeze no one else could feel. The warbeast, called Kragthar the Skull Splitter, was a legendary champion across 17 systems. Its armor fused into its skin, its arms reinforced with tungsten tendons and liquid iron veins. It let out a roar that shook the observation towers and charged forward, claws scraping the marble floor in a high-speed lunge. Tenzin tilted his head slightly, almost with curiosity, and then did the unthinkable. He stepped sideways by half a foot. The entire arena gasped as the behemoth crashed past him, claws slicing through empty air. Without ever raising his voice or lifting a hand, the blind monk had evaded death, and not by reflex, but with grace. Kragthar stumbled forward, losing momentum, and the arena shifted from amusement to confusion. Minutes earlier, the galaxy's most powerful beings had gathered here on Astral 9, a floating fortress of ego orbiting a dead sun. Every year, the Colosseum hosted the Council's Trial of Worth, a brutal tournament to showcase dominance. It was a political theater drenched in blood. Participants ranged from genetically modified warriors to cyber assassins and mind-forged gladiators. Each civilization sent their best, except for Earth, which sent him. No guns. No armor. Just a man they said could hear a heartbeat in a hurricane. Some speculated it was a last-ditch attempt by Earth to remain in Council favor. Others thought it was a provocation. A few even believed the monk was a political prisoner being thrown to his death. None were prepared for what they were about to witness. When Earth's ambassador was questioned days earlier about their odd choice, he had simply said, "Our champion doesn't need to see to show you what you've all forgotten." Back in the pit, Kragthar turned, growling low, clearly embarrassed. The crowd regained its voice, now angrier than amused. They wanted blood, not performance art. The warbeast charged again, this time with calculated feints and deceptive footwork designed to trap the monk in a corner. But Tenzin glided around each move with terrifying calm, his bare feet barely making a sound against the stone floor. At one point, he turned his back entirely, walking in a slow arc, forcing Kragthar to spin too fast and overcommit his weight. Then, with a breath, Tenzin extended one hand and tapped the beast's left knee with 2 fingers. The warbeast collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut. The silence that followed was louder than any explosion. Tenzin stepped back and gave a short bow toward the stunned creature now groaning on the floor. He didn't look at the crowd. He couldn't. But somehow, they all felt he was looking directly into their souls. One by one, the warlords and dignitaries in the luxury skyboxes leaned forward. Some out of curiosity. Others with dawning discomfort. They had laughed at him, but now they couldn't explain what they'd seen. The arena medics rushed in to carry Kragthar away, and when the next champion was called, he hesitated a full 5 seconds before entering the pit. The laughter didn't return. While the arena buzzed with whispers, Earth's ambassador sat calmly in his box, hands clasped behind his back. An alien general from the Norvok syndicate leaned in and hissed, "Who is that monk?" The ambassador didn't look away from the pit. Just a man who sees with discipline, not eyes. You all measure strength by how loudly it shouts. We measure by how quietly it stands. Tenzin, of course, heard none of this. Or rather, he heard everything. Not the words, but the intentions, the shift in tone, the uneasy rustling of synthetic capes and armored boots. He had grown up blind, but not defenseless. Raised in a forgotten monastery high in the Himalayas, he'd trained in silence, in freezing winds and blistering sun, guided by the vibrations of the world rather than the illusions of sight. His masters had taught him to hear muscle tension, to feel footfalls through stone, and to predict attack patterns by listening to breath. While others chased machines and weapons, Tenzin had mastered presence. As the next opponent entered, a sleek serpentine creature armed with plasma blades on each wrist, Tenzin remained still. The announcer barely finished calling its name before the creature leapt toward him, slashing in a complex web of high-speed arcs. Spectators leaned in. But again, Tenzin moved like water slipping through a net. He turned, ducked, and waited, not to attack, but to let the opponent destroy itself. And it did. A spin too wide, a strike too long, a shift of weight onto a weak ankle. With a whisper of movement, Tenzin placed one hand on the attacker's shoulder as it passed him, and the creature flipped itself, landing hard enough to rattle its own bones. By now, even the most cynical spectators were no longer laughing. The betting odds crashed in real time, leaving many furious and red-faced. Someone tried to claim Earth had smuggled in illegal psychic enhancers. Others shouted for disqualification. But every scan, every sensor, every analysis came back the same. Tenzin was completely natural. No enhancements, no hidden tech, no cheat. Just stillness. That night, as the arena lights dimmed and the competitors retired to their quarters, Tenzin sat alone in his chamber, legs crossed on the stone floor. He inhaled slowly, then exhaled, his breath barely audible. Around him, surveillance drones hovered silently, their lenses zoomed in, trying to record his techniques. They would find nothing. Tenzin wasn't hiding anything. He simply didn't care whether they understood him or not. He hadn't come to win. He had come to show them what they'd forgotten. Outside his chamber, a janitor bot whispered to another in a language only machines spoke. It had watched thousands of fighters. But never one like this. The first said, "I think he's dangerous." The second replied, "He's worse than dangerous. He's unafraid." And even the machines fell quiet. The council chamber above the arena wasn't built for whispers, but that didn't stop them. The galactic elites had ruled unchallenged for generations. They didn't fear armies because they controlled them. They didn't fear assassins because they built them. But now, they feared something unfamiliar, a barefoot blind man who moved through chaos with the quiet of falling snow. The chamber flickered with projections of the tournament footage, slowed to milliseconds per frame, showing Tenzin's movements over and over again. The scans insisted he was human. The council insisted he wasn't. What bothered them most wasn't how he won, but that he looked like he didn't care whether he did. There was no triumph in his expression, no performance in his posture. It was like watching gravity bend around calm. An Androthane general slammed his fist on the data console and shouted that it had to be trickery. He demanded Tenzin be subjected to full-spectrum interrogation, including psionic evaluation. A representative from the Vral Dominion muttered that Earth had clearly developed illegal neural dampeners. The ambassador from Earth, a wiry woman with gray temples and an expression of mild curiosity, sipped her tea and said nothing. When asked again about Tenzin's training, she shrugged and replied softly, "He meditates, mostly." This answer enraged the elites further, not because it was insulting, but because they couldn't prove it was a lie. Meanwhile, down in the arena dormitories, Tenzin sat beside a rusted heating vent with a chipped tea bowl in his hands. His fingers traced the imperfections in the ceramic like old friends. Around him, fighters from across galaxies polished weapons, applied ointments to bruises, and glared at him with equal parts confusion and resentment. No one spoke to him. Some feared he was a fraud. Others feared he wasn't. But one young fighter, a four-armed feline hybrid named Javo, crept over and sat quietly across from him. After a few awkward minutes, Javo asked why he didn't seem scared. Tenzin smiled and answered, "What would fear change?" Javo blinked, not sure if it was wisdom or nonsense. Probably both. The next round of the tournament included non-combat tests meant to humiliate the weaker species. It was a council tradition, an elitist ritual cloaked as entertainment. Participants were forced to perform tasks that highlighted obedience or physical absurdity, like serving refreshments to their former opponents, or navigating obstacle courses designed for creatures with wings. When Tenzin was called to the front, the announcer declared he would be assigned a role as a servant to the warlord Veltrax. Laughter echoed before he'd even stood. Tenzin walked calmly to the warlord's box, accepted a tray of steaming drinks, and knelt to offer the first cup. As he handed it forward, he said, "I hear your shoulder stiffens before you move. Perhaps less venom in your tea might help." Veltrax froze, glaring. The arena did too. Everyone knew Veltrax had barely survived an assassination attempt 2 years prior involving poisoned tea. And now the blind earth monk had called it out like weather. The warlord hesitated, then laughed too loudly and clapped Tenzin on the back. The performance was clearly a cover, but everyone watching understood something had shifted. What had begun as mockery now felt like a dare. Tenzin continued the task with precise balance and silent presence, his every step flowing like music no one else could hear. When he returned to his place, he bowed, not to Veltrax, but to the crowd. The entire gallery fell awkwardly silent for the third time in the tournament's history. Back in the underground levels, a team of scientists assigned by the council prepared to intercept Tenzin for further scans. They claimed it was protocol, but their equipment suggested otherwise. Neuroresonance scanners, bone density analyzers, even emotion mapping overlays, they all waited. But when they cornered him near the quartermaster's station, he stopped, turned slightly toward them, and said, "It's curious how much effort you waste proving what already is." The chief technician, who had spent 40 years dissecting warlords, stepped back. Without raising his voice, Tenzin had dismantled their authority. Later that evening, the Galactic Council met in private to debate next steps. The threat wasn't physical, they agreed. If Tenzin had snapped necks and roared victory, they could have framed him as a savage. But he didn't. He dismantled their champions with elegance, offered tea to their tyrants, and bowed when mocked. It wasn't his strength they feared, it was the silence he left behind. The silence made people think. And thinking was always dangerous in a system built on blind obedience. Elsewhere in the arena, word of Tenzin's actions spread through the service corridors and maintenance hatches. Bots recorded his movements. Fighters rewatched his matches. Some even tried to mimic his footwork in private, failing miserably. One particularly arrogant mercenary tried to mock the monk by walking with eyes closed and a stick, only to trip and fall into a food dispenser. The laughter from other fighters was louder than expected. Something was changing. Jevo, the young feline fighter, followed Tenzin that night to the arena garden, a narrow patch of artificially maintained greenery meant for elite stress reduction. Tenzin knelt by the plants, touching their stems, listening to the rustle. Javo asked if he'd ever been afraid of dying. Tenzin replied that he'd died once, when he was 8, buried in an avalanche in the Himalayas. No breath, no sound, only the heartbeat of the earth until the monks dug him out 3 hours later. Since then, he said, he'd known the difference between fear and awareness. One traps you. The other frees you. Javo nodded slowly, unsure what to say, then quietly said thank you and walked away, his claws brushing stone with a new rhythm. That same night, footage of Tenzin's performance with Veltrax leaked onto the colony networks. It went viral in under 6 minutes. Not just for the dodge or the tea comment, but for the stillness. The colonies, long oppressed by elite rulers, saw something in the monk's calm that resonated. In a universe full of noise, he was the first signal worth following. Posters emerged digitally with his silhouette, and a single phrase beneath, "Stand quiet, and you will hear the fall." By the time morning arrived, the arena's atmosphere had shifted again. The other fighters no longer looked at Tenzin as prey or comic relief. They avoided eye contact. Not out of respect, yet, but out of growing uncertainty. The council members began to receive encrypted messages from their colonies asking who he was. Civilian broadcasts questioned the tournament's purpose. And deep within the inner server nodes of the Galactic Coliseum, an AI tasked with trend prediction changed a single forecast parameter from amusement to instability. The blind monk, who never threw a punch in celebration, had become more dangerous than any conqueror. Not because he fought harder, but because he reminded everyone what peace looked like, right before everything began to break. The final round of the tournament was announced with blaring horns and a holographic display that filled the Colosseum sky with images of flame, metal, and blood. The grand champion of the Zarg Dominion would face Earth's remaining contestant in a match to the end. For weeks, this was the moment the elites had waited for. All other fights were appetizers. This one was the spectacle, the main course, the proof that their system still held dominance over every upstart species in the galaxy. And yet, the audience felt a strange tension. They were not chanting this time. They were watching too closely. Whispers moved faster than the light shows. Many were here not to celebrate the Zarg warrior but to confirm whether the blind monk was truly real. His opponent was a towering figure wrapped in curved black armor, reinforced with layers of neutronium and laced with kinetic fiber that adjusted to impact. His name was Trexen Ro, a living weapon forged through 6 generations of warrior bloodlines. His skin was woven with anti-blade lattice. His eyes could scan motion before it began. He was a favorite not just because of strength, but because of spectacle. He didn't just win. He humiliated. His last fight ended with his opponent's skull mounted to his own shoulder pad before the body even hit the ground. Trexen entered the arena to thunderous applause, his steps booming like a collapsing star. Across from him, Tenzin stepped forward without a sound, his bare feet making soft prints in the arena dust. He looked as if he had just awoken from a nap and wasn't quite sure where he was. The crowd leaned in, hungry for destruction, but unsure who they wanted destroyed anymore. Trexen circled Tenzin slowly, his movements practiced and controlled, like a predator testing the air before striking. He tilted his head and spoke into the arena comms, projecting his voice. He asked the monk if he had any last words. Tenzin smiled faintly, and replied that endings were rarely where things truly stopped. Trexen laughed, and declared that he would end Earth's embarrassment once and for all. And with that, the match began. The initial charge was brutal. Trexen came in fast, faster than any human should have been able to perceive, his blade arm igniting with a plasma arc meant to slice through most known metals. But it meant nothing. Tenzin wasn't there. He hadn't jumped. He hadn't dodged. He had simply stepped to the side at the exact moment the blade swept past. The crowd blinked. Trexen spun, roaring, throwing a series of rapid strikes, each designed to herd Tenzin into a trap. But the monk's movements made no sense to traditional logic. He didn't fight the way soldiers did. He didn't react to patterns. He moved with the rhythm of something deeper, something older. The fight was supposed to be violent. But now, it looked like a dance between storm and breeze. Trexen grew angrier. He began using kinetic pulses, triggering quakes in the floor and sending shockwaves through the pit. Tenzin bent with each vibration, flowing like grass beneath heavy wind, each motion reducing the force meant to break him. Then came the turning point. Trexen lunged forward with both blades, locking Tenzin's position in a 3-point kill zone. But the monk moved directly forward into the strike. The entire crowd inhaled. And just as the blades closed in, Tenzin dropped to a knee, rolled beneath the sweeping arcs, and stood up behind his opponent. He tapped the back of Trexen's armored leg. Just one touch. Trexen stumbled. Then froze. One foot dragged. His balance faltered. Something wasn't right. The Zarg champion swung backward blindly, trying to recover, but his body betrayed him. His own momentum twisted him into the ground. When he tried to stand, one leg buckled. A second attempt left his arms spasming. The crowd began to murmur. High in the control chambers, elite medics scanned Trexen's vitals. Nothing registered as broken, but nerve interference patterns were firing in random loops. He wasn't damaged. He was disrupted. Tenzin had turned his own force against him. Trexen fell to one knee and roared in frustration, slamming his fist into the floor, causing a crater that cracked the arena tiles. Tenzin stood across from him, unmoved. He didn't strike. He didn't taunt. He just waited, breathing with quiet focus. The match wasn't over. Trexen wasn't finished. He activated his emergency combat protocol, forcing his armor into override mode, pushing his body beyond safety limits. His muscles inflated. His bones locked in reinforced position. He charged once more. This time with a desperation born not of honor but of rage. The monk didn't move. Not at first. He let the warlord come within 2 feet, then raised a single hand, palm forward. The collision should have shattered his bones. Instead, Trexen stopped cold, his own legs refusing to push further. His chest heaved. He dropped to the ground, not from impact, but from exhaustion and failure. His body had shut itself down, outsmarted by its own limits. Tenzin lowered his hand and turned to walk away. The arena was silent. Not a single cheer rose. No explosions of praise. The moment was too surreal. The judges didn't know whether to call the match or demand a rematch. But as Trexen lay panting, unable to move, the reality became impossible to deny. The champion had been defeated. Not with violence. Not with spectacle. With balance. And then the twist came. Without warning, the main display screen above the arena glitched, and a new broadcast began. It wasn't part of the tournament's planned coverage. It was footage, unedited and raw, of Tenzin's earlier matches, of him serving tea to Veltrax, of him speaking softly to Jevo, of him meditating in the garden under artificial starlight. The angles were intimate. The sound clear. The camera wasn't the arena's. It had been leaked from within the maintenance bots. And the feed wasn't going just to the elites. It was going to the colonies. Across dozens of systems, oppressed species watched the blind monk move without fear, win without hate, and smile without revenge. Children mimicked his slow stance. Former rebels recorded his words and broadcast them with subtitles. He became more than a competitor. He became a symbol. And when the final frame froze on Tenzin's bowed head, a single line of text hovered beneath it. It read, "Strength does not shout. It listens." The Colosseum Control Center went into a panic. Who hacked the feed? How did it reach the outer colonies? But it was too late. The message had spread. Protests began within hours on remote worlds. Flags bearing Tenzin's silhouette replaced the banners of old governments. One by one, the empires that laughed now faced crowds that demanded silence. And the council understood something too late. In trying to mock him, they had amplified him. Back in the empty arena, Tenzin stood alone. No roar of approval. No hand raised in victory. Just silence. He turned, hearing the tension fade from the stones beneath his feet. As he walked away, one of the guards assigned to escort him whispered, "What are you?" Tenzin paused and replied without turning, "I am no one. That is why they cannot hold me." And he vanished into the shadows as the empire began to tremble. The council gathered behind closed doors, their ceremonial cloaks discarded for armored suits and silent panic. They sat around the circular chamber where laws were once passed, but now only strategies of suppression were whispered. Dozens of worlds had erupted in minor rebellions after the broadcast of the monk's matches. His image, once a subject of mockery, now hung from flags, graffiti, and holograms in back alleys and city centers. It wasn't just that he had won, it was how. The lack of violence, the absence of malice, the refusal to celebrate or claim power had confused the order of dominance they relied on. There had always been winners and losers, power and obedience. But Tenzin offered a third path, and the galaxy was starting to walk it. Worse, they were doing it without being told. Several members of the council demanded the monk be detained immediately and sent to a secure facility under council interrogation. Others cautioned against such a move, worried that making a martyr out of him would only worsen the spread. They debated endlessly, speaking in circles, the fear behind their words growing clearer by the hour. The ambassador from Earth, who had remained mostly silent since the tournament began, now spoke. She asked them calmly if they knew what they were really afraid of. They tried to argue back with regulations, rules, threats. But she cut through it all. "You are afraid," she said, "not of what he did, but of what he reminded your people is possible." The council ordered her removed from the chamber. She left willingly, her expression unchanged, her silence echoing louder than any protest. But by then, it was already too late. Even among the guards there were whispers. Some of them had watched Tenzin's matches on their breaks, again and again. Others had family in the colonies who sent them videos, pictures, stories of peaceful gatherings now erupting with calls for truth and change. The soldiers were trained to follow orders. But now, they weren't sure who was really leading. Tenzin had been placed under light surveillance after the final match, but no formal charges were filed. The council's fear made them hesitate, and that hesitation allowed the monk to walk freely through the arena corridors. On the third day after his victory, he visited the old maintenance wing where damaged equipment was stored and sat cross-legged on a rusted bench. No guards followed. No bots recorded. And yet word spread that he was there. Within hours, fighters from the tournament, workers from the arena, even a few junior council aides came to see him. Not to question him, not to challenge him, but just to watch. Some sat beside him in silence. Others asked quiet questions, hoping for wisdom. Tenzin answered only a few. Mostly, he listened. In the upper chambers, the council's internal system began to show warning signs. Communications from outer systems grew erratic. A supply convoy had been turned back by its own escort ships. A military base on Kelleron 6 had refused a direct order from High Command. On one fringe planet, protesters blocked an energy station for 12 hours without speaking a word, standing still in formation that mirrored the monk's final match pose. The council's intelligence analysts began to call it the silence movement. No weapons, no slogans. Just people refusing to kneel, refusing to fight, and yet refusing to move. Desperate for control, the council authorized a covert detainment operation. They sent a hand-picked squad of elite enforcers to take Tenzin quietly from the arena and bring him to a secured black site in orbit. The team moved with precision, disabling cameras and scrambling drone feeds. When they entered the maintenance wing, they found Tenzin exactly where the reports had said he would be, sitting peacefully, his hands resting in his lap. The squad leader barked orders for him to stand. Tenzin did not. One of the enforcers approached, reaching for restraints. But before he could touch the monk, something strange happened. The lights flickered. Then all across the arena, doors opened. The enforcers turned to see dozens of fighters, arena workers, medics, and even low-ranking soldiers walking in. They didn't speak. They just stood between the monk and his captors. One by one, they took positions without instruction. The monk didn't look at any of them, but a soft smile crept to his lips. The enforcers were outnumbered, but not outgunned. Still, they didn't move. The tension was unbearable. Then, to everyone's surprise, the squad leader lowered his weapon. He looked at Tenzin, then at the people in the room, and said nothing. He turned and walked away, his squad following slowly. Not one shot fired. Not one order given. Just quiet resistance. It wasn't bravery that stopped them. It was doubt. Doubt that the system they served had meaning anymore. That single moment was captured by a hidden maintenance cam and spread like wildfire. The footage of a monk being protected not by warriors, but by the very people who were supposed to enforce his arrest, became the most watched recording in galactic history within 3 hours. Across worlds, statues were toppled, flags replaced, and speeches rewritten. The council convened an emergency summit, but their words carried no weight. Their own guards looked at them differently. Not with fear. With pity. By the end of the 4th day, the arenas were empty. The tournament grounds became gathering places. People came not for violence but for silence. Entire planets began broadcasting nothing but the sounds of wind, of water, of space. A symbolic rejection of the noise that had once defined control. It wasn't an uprising. It wasn't war. It was something worse for the council. It was erosion. Tenzin, for his part, refused all invitations to speak. He left the arena that night without ceremony, walking past open gates, down paths lit only by the moon of the orbital station. He returned to the ship that had brought him from Earth, nodding once at the ambassador before entering without a word. The engines hummed, the ship lifted, and just like that, the monk was gone. No throne claimed, no banners held. He came as no one, and left the same. But the galaxy he left behind would never be the same. In trying to laugh at him, the elites had given him their stage. In trying to erase him, they had etched his presence deeper into the minds of billions. And now, the silence he left behind was louder than any rebellion they had ever faced. The summit took place on a barren moon orbiting a gas giant so distant it didn't have a name the common worlds remembered. There were no press, no banners, no ceremonial robes. Just armored transports, silenced escorts, and security drones floating like silent wasps through the black sky. The few warlords and council members who still believed they held influence arrived under the pretense of restoring order. They had each suffered in silence over the last week. Colonies once obedient had turned contemplative. Some refused orders. Some cut transmissions entirely. Others simply stopped showing up to council calls, citing meditation or community gatherings inspired by the monk. There were no explosions. No assassinations. No loud revolts. Just silence that spread like fog and suffocated authority without needing to shout. Inside the summit chamber, arguments erupted the moment the doors sealed. Accusations of weakness, betrayal, manipulation, and sabotage flew across the table. One warlord insisted Earth had engineered a covert mimetic weapon and called for immediate invasion. Another claimed Tenzin was not human at all, but a bioconstruct designed by a rogue AI from the Sol system. A third offered proof that several military captains had resigned after watching the monks' matches on loop for hours. No one could agree on a solution. No one dared say the truth out loud. Their fear wasn't about Earth's strength. It was about their own fragility being exposed. The monk had done what generations of warfare never achieved. He showed their subjects that power was only held because everyone agreed to pretend it was real. They were still arguing when the security system flickered. A ripple ran through the light panels on the walls. Half the room stood, hands on weapons. For a moment, no one breathed. And then the door to the summit chamber opened without command. A single figure stepped through. Bare feet, gray robes, and a calm expression that should not have been possible in the presence of so many killers. Tenzin walked forward slowly, unarmed, unguarded, and utterly unafraid. Every hand hovered near a weapon. But none moved. Something about the way he entered made violence feel foolish. He stopped at the edge of the circular platform and lowered himself to a seated position, cross-legged, palms on knees, head tilted slightly forward like he was listening to a storm no one else could hear. They demanded to know how he got in. He said nothing. One of the warlords shouted at him to explain his purpose. Tenzin simply replied that he had come to return what they had forgotten. His voice was soft, but it carried across the stone floor like a blade in still air. One by one, the leaders began to speak, asking questions, shouting demands, making threats. But Tenzin remained silent. He did not move. And slowly, they realized he was not there to answer them. He was there to make them hear themselves. And in that chamber of ego and steel, their voices sounded brittle. One council member finally broke and rushed forward, drawing a plasma dagger and raising it above the monk's head. Tenzin did not flinch. His breathing never changed. The blade trembled in the councilman's grip. Then, with a strange, cracking sound, the man dropped to his knees, sobbing. He couldn't speak. Couldn't strike. He wasn't stopped by fear. He was stopped by the weight of everything he pretended not to carry. The room froze. No guards moved. No weapons rose. The others stared at the monk, realizing that their greatest terror wasn't that he would kill them. It was that he didn't need to. When Tenzin stood and turned to leave, no one followed. The path cleared before him, not by force, but by choice. And then the true collapse began. Word of the summit traveled fast despite the blackout. One technician on a maintenance ship recorded the security feed and leaked it through a forgotten relay station. The footage showed not an uprising or a threat, but a room full of rulers brought to silence by one man's calm. The feed spread across the stars, reaching every planet, every station, every corner of the galaxy where people had once felt small. And the reactions were not explosive. They were quiet. More people stopped. Saturday. Reflected. Leaders began to disappear from their seats not because they were killed or deposed, but because they could no longer speak with authority in a world that had remembered how to listen. Tenzin returned to Earth without announcement. No parades waited for him. No ceremonies were held. He stepped off the transport into the cold mountain air and walked the familiar trail back to the temple nestled between jagged cliffs. The snow had started to fall again, soft and indifferent. He entered the meditation hall and took his old place beside the ancient bell. No one spoke. His fellow monks offered a nod. And he resumed what he had always done. Breathing. Sitting. Being. Across the galaxy, his presence lingered. In war rooms once filled with maps and red buttons, leaders found only silence when they called for battle plans. In broadcast towers where propaganda once echoed, workers chose to play recordings of rivers and birds. In military academies once fueled by aggression, new cadets gathered to learn about stillness, about posture, about how to move without needing to destroy. It was not peace by victory. It was peace by fatigue. The old systems had tired themselves out trying to shout down a whisper. No monuments were built in Tenzin's honor. He would not have wanted them. But on every planet where he had been seen, someone carved a small stone and left it beside a road or under a tree. No name, no symbol. Just a smooth stone. A reminder. That strength could be quiet. That power did not require domination. That the monk who never raised a hand had made the galaxy bow by reminding it to stand. The council, what remained of it, never reconvened. Some faded into exile. Others tried to reassert control but found their words turned to dust the moment they met the gaze of a crowd that no longer feared. Earth was left alone. Not protected by fleets or weapons, but by reverence. No one wanted to conquer the place that had sent the man who ended wars by simply refusing to fight them. And Tenzin, alone in his temple, continued the path he had always known. He was not a leader. He was not a savior. He was a monk who had listened to the heartbeat of the universe long enough to understand that silence was not emptiness. It was clarity. And now, through him, the galaxy heard it too.